My name is Claire. I am 31 years old. I use a wheelchair because of a spinal injury I sustained 4 years ago in a car accident that also killed my husband, Daniel. I am telling you this not for sympathy. I am telling you this because it is the context my brother Ryan used to decide, on the afternoon of his wedding, that I was an embarrassment. He did not say it like that. He never said anything directly. Ryan has always been the kind of person who commits cruelty with the confidence of someone who expects to be thanked for it. What happened was this. The reception had moved into toasts. Ryan's new wife, Melissa, was standing beside him, ivory silk, bright teeth, her hand tucked inside his elbow. The room was warm and full of laughter, and then Ryan leaned down toward me. I was at the end of the head table, where the accessible space was, and he said, quietly, the way people say things they do not want remembered, "Claire, I need you to move to one of the back tables. The photos are going to look uneven with the chair there." I looked at him. He looked at me. "Ryan?" He did not wait. He gripped the handles of my wheelchair, the ones behind my shoulders, and he pulled, fast, tilted, like he was emptying a wheelbarrow. I went sideways. My left arm caught the table edge. I hit the floor. The room went so quiet I could hear the candles. I was on the floor of my brother's wedding reception, among scattered rose petals and the hem of my bridesmaid's dress, staring up at the barn rafters, and Ryan straightened his jacket and said, "She lost her balance." I need to pause here for just a moment. Before I tell you what happened after I hit that floor, what the doctor found, what the documents proved, what Ryan said when his lie collapsed in front of everyone, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you reading this right now? What does it look like outside your window? Is it morning or late at night? And are you in a quiet place or a noisy one? And I want to ask you this. Have you ever had someone you loved deeply use your vulnerability as a prop to be hidden rather than a part of you to be accepted? I hope this story reaches every corner of the world, because what happened after I got up from that floor is something I think a lot of people need to hear. But before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back to how this started. I grew up in Claremont, a mid-sized town in Ohio, where the main conversation, for as long as I can remember, was Ryan. Ryan had always been the one the family pointed toward like a compass needle. Older than me by 5 years, he was the kind of person who walked into rooms and made them reorganize around him. He had been a varsity quarterback, then a business degree, then a regional sales director at 30 for a logistics company with 11 offices in 3 states. My parents, my mother, Diane, who collected other people's approvals like currency, and my father, Gerald, who had spent 30 years in law enforcement and communicated primarily through silence and disappointment, had built a mythology around Ryan so complete that questioning it felt like bad theology. I had understood my role in that family from a young age. I was the younger one, the quieter one, the one who had married Daniel at 24 and moved 2 hours away and built something small and good and private. Daniel had been a high school science teacher. We had a daughter, Nora, who was 7 now, and who had her father's eyes and my tendency to go very still when she was thinking hard about something. When Daniel died, I came home. I did not want to, but I was 27. I had a 3-year-old. I was relearning how to move through the world from a wheelchair after spinal surgery, and I had no income and $14,000 in savings. So I came home. And Ryan had been generous in the way wealthy people sometimes perform generosity. He had helped me find an accessible apartment. He had co-signed a small business loan so I could start a freelance graphic design practice. He had driven Nora to her preschool on Tuesday mornings for 4 months, and our parents had spoken of this for years afterward, as though he had donated a kidney. What they did not speak of, the time Ryan told me, in front of his then-girlfriend, I should stop making the disability your whole personality.
Nora had been in the next room. I had said nothing. The time he called my business loan charity at a family dinner, laughing, and when I went quiet, he said I was too sensitive. My mother touched my hand and looked away. The time he forwarded a family group thread about holiday plans and said, "Just checking, are we still able to use the lake house, or is the chair situation going to be a problem again?" My father replied with a thumbs up emoji. I removed myself from the thread. No one noticed for 11 days. I want to be honest with you. I absorbed these moments the way you absorb small doses of something toxic, slowly, with adaptation, convincing yourself the accumulation is manageable. Dr. Marcus Webb had been my physiatrist for 3 years. He had an office at Claremont Regional Medical Center, a quiet man with precise speech and a habit of writing things down by hand rather than typing them. He was not someone I would have described as warm exactly, but he was someone I trusted. He had been monitoring my spinal recovery. He had, at my last appointment 6 weeks before the wedding, noted some new developments in my imaging results and told me he would need to discuss them with me soon. I had been putting that conversation off. The wedding was on a Saturday in late September. That appointment with Dr. Webb was scheduled for the Monday after the wedding. I did not know, sitting on that barn floor, that the two events were about to intersect in a way that would unravel everything Ryan had spent years constructing.
Ryan helped me back into my wheelchair himself. He did it quickly, efficiently, with the practiced ease of a man managing a public relations situation. And when it was done, he gripped my shoulder once and said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, "There she is. You okay, Claire Bear?" It was not a question, it was a stage direction. And I said, quietly, yes. That was the first level, the performance of care deployed immediately after the act of harm, so seamlessly that the witnesses remembered the performance. The morning after the wedding, I woke up in the hotel room I had shared with Nora and could not get my left leg to respond properly for 47 minutes. I sat on the edge of the bed while Nora slept, timing it on my phone, running through the clinical possibilities the way Dr. Webb had taught me to. When movement returned, it came with a burning that started at my L4 vertebra and radiated downward. I made a note in my phone. I did not call anyone. Ryan texted at 10:15 a.m., "Hope you're feeling okay. The photos turned out incredible, BTW." I did not respond. 3 days later, my mother called. This was level 2. Diane had a particular technique, which was to begin conversations in a tone of such practiced gentleness that disagreement felt like vandalism. She said she had spoken to Ryan, that he felt terrible about the little stumble, and that she hoped I wasn't going to make things difficult now that he and Melissa were starting their life together. I asked my mother, he felt terrible or he felt caught? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You've always had trouble letting things go, Claire." I hung up. Ryan called 2 days after that. This was level 3, and it arrived with a different texture. He was not performing gentleness. He said that he had heard I was telling people a different version of what happened at the reception, which was not accurate. I had told exactly one person, my friend and neighbor Patrice. And he said that if I was planning to turn his wedding into some kind of disability drama, he would need to involve their parents in a bigger conversation about boundaries. He used the phrase disability drama. I wrote it down. "I'm not telling people anything," I said. "Good," he said. "Then we're fine." We were not fine. Level 4 arrived through Melissa, which surprised me slightly. Melissa sent me a message 11 days after the wedding, and the message was long and it was filled with the language of therapy, boundaries, intentions, impact versus intent, deployed in service of telling me that Ryan had truly been struggling with the pressure of the wedding day, and that as someone who had always had more needs than the average person, I should perhaps consider whether I had been centering myself at an event that was not about me. She said she hoped we could move forward as a family. I read that message 4 times. Each time, the phrase, "more needs than the average person," sat in my chest like something calcified. I forwarded it to Patrice.
Patrice, who was a paralegal and had an extremely clear-eyed relationship with language, read it and said, "Claire, save everything." So I started saving everything. Level 5 came from my father. Gerald had not spoken to me directly about the wedding until 3 weeks after, when he arrived at my apartment unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon, which he had never done before. He sat in my living room with his hands on his knees, and he said that Ryan was worried about the business loan, the one from 4 years ago, the one Ryan had co-signed, and that given the current family tension, Ryan was considering whether he needed to reassess his financial exposure. The loan had been paid off for 14 months. I had the documentation. I told my father this. Gerald looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Don't be dramatic about this." He left. Nora had been in her bedroom the entire time, doing homework. When Gerald's car pulled out of the lot, she came and stood in the doorway and looked at me. "Is Grandpa mad at us?" she asked. "No," I said. "He's confused about something." "Oh," she said. Then, "Did you do something wrong?" She asked it with such genuine, open curiosity, the way 7-year-olds ask things, without accusation, just wondering. And I looked at my daughter standing in her rainbow socks at the edge of the hallway, and I felt something that had been slowly compressing inside me for years reach its limit and stop. Level 6 happened 4 days later. Ryan called again, and this time there was no gentleness at all. He said that I had been poisoning the family with my victim mentality since Daniel died, that everyone had done everything for me, and that I had given nothing back, that Melissa had cried because of my behavior, and then he said, cleanly, clearly, without hesitation, "Honestly, Claire, it would have been better for everyone if you had just stayed home. You knew what you were getting yourself into, bringing that chair into that venue." The chair, not myself, the chair, as though I had arrived as luggage. "Okay," I said. "Okay," he said. "Yes," I said. I pressed end. That night, after Nora was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my phone and read back through every message I had saved over the previous 4 weeks. The texts, Melissa's long email, the notes I had typed the morning after the hotel, the note about disability drama, the time he said the loan was charity, the time he called me a problem for the lake house. I had spent 3 years protecting Ryan's image within my own mind, deciding he was careless rather than cruel, deciding each incident was isolated rather than patterned, deciding that calling it what it was would cost more than absorbing it. In that moment, I stopped. I opened a new note on my phone and typed one sentence: "I am not the problem that needs managing." I sent one text to Dr. Webb's after-hours patient portal. I said I needed to move our Monday appointment up and that I also needed to ask him something about documentation. I did not sleep well that night, but I slept with the specific quality of someone who has made a decision they will not reverse. Dr. Webb saw me that Friday at 11:30 a.m. He is not a person who wastes time on preamble, which I have always appreciated. He pulled up my most recent MRI results on the monitor and he said, "The fall you described, the one at the reception, I need you to tell me exactly what happened mechanically." I told him, the grip on the handles, the tilt, the impact on my left side, the 47 minutes the following morning, the burning at L4. He was quiet for a moment, writing. Then he said, "The imaging I took 2 weeks ago showed new micro-instability at L3, L4. This is consistent with trauma impact. The incident you've described, being physically displaced from the chair at that angle, that would be consistent with what I'm seeing." I asked him what that meant in practical terms. He said it meant the fall had caused measurable, documentable spinal trauma. He said it meant the incident was not a stumble. He said it meant that whoever had physically caused that displacement had caused a spinal injury to a patient with a pre-existing and documented condition. He said, "Claire, this is something that should be reported." I had already begun. The previous Wednesday, I had contacted a personal injury attorney named Sandra O'Coffer, whose office was 40 minutes from Claremont. Sandra was methodical and quiet, and she did not react visibly to anything, which I found reassuring. I had sent her the saved messages, the timeline I had written, and a description of the incident. She had reviewed them and called me Thursday morning and said, "We have something here, especially if the medical documentation supports the mechanism of injury." It supported it. Dr. Webb wrote a formal clinical narrative, 3 pages, single-spaced, documenting my pre-existing condition, the nature of the new imaging findings, the mechanism by which the displacement described would produce them, and his professional assessment that the incident constituted externally caused traumatic aggravation of a documented spinal disability. Sandra filed a civil complaint that Tuesday. The complaint named Ryan specifically and cited the medical documentation, the witness accounts. Patrice had provided a written statement confirming I had described the incident to her the morning after, before any escalation, and the documented pattern of communications that followed, which Sandra characterized as a coordinated attempt to suppress the plaintiff's account of the incident. Ryan's response, delivered through his own attorney 4 days later, was that the fall had been accidental, that I had lost my balance independently, and that the subsequent communications had been a good faith family effort to preserve relationships during a stressful time. Then Dr. Webb's office located something. In the process of pulling my complete medical record to support the complaint, Dr. Webb's team discovered that someone had called the medical center 14 months prior, specifically 8 days after I had first mentioned in a family phone call that my recovery was progressing well and that I might be returning to some part-time physical work, and requested information about whether my disability was likely to be permanent. The call was logged, as all such inquiries are, and the caller had identified themselves as a family member inquiring on my behalf. The callback number on the log was Ryan's cell. He had not told me. He had not asked my permission. He had called my medical provider without my knowledge or consent to gather information about my prognosis, and the most probable reason, Sandra told me, was financial. The loan was co-signed. If my disability resolved and my income increased, his co-signature liability decreased. He had been monitoring my condition as a financial instrument. Sandra sent a letter to Ryan's attorney informing them that the medical center inquiry had been discovered and would be included in the documentation. Ryan called me that night. His voice had quality I had never heard in it before, something thin and almost high. He said, it had been a misunderstanding, that he was worried about me, that everything he had done had been out of love. I said, "I know, Ryan." He said, "So we can fix this." I said, "I don't think so." The line was quiet. Then he said, "If you do this, you will never be part of this family again." I said, "I know." I ended the call.
The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday in December at Sandra's office. It was a gray morning, the kind where the light looks like it has been filtered through something old. Ryan arrived with his attorney and his wife. My parents arrived separately and sat in the waiting area because Sandra had asked that they not be present unless called, which my mother had agreed to with the brittle politeness she reserved for situations she did not control. Ryan looked composed when he came in. He had the bearing of a person who had spent days rehearsing reasonableness. He nodded at me when he sat down. I nodded back. Sandra opened by presenting the documentation in order. Dr. Webb had agreed to participate via video. He appeared on the laptop at the head of the table, in his office, in his white coat, with the measured affect of someone delivering a clinical finding rather than a verdict. He walked through the imaging. He explained microinstability. He described the mechanism of injury in terms that were precise and entirely free of emotion. He said, "In my professional opinion, the fall described by my patient on the date in question was not the result of a balance failure. The injury pattern is consistent with external physical displacement." Ryan's attorney said that Dr. Webb's opinion was one interpretation. Dr. Webb said, "Yes, it is my interpretation, formed from 22 years of physiatric practice, supported by the imaging and documented in the clinical record." Ryan said nothing. Sandra then presented the phone log from the medical center inquiry. She placed a printed copy in front of Ryan's attorney and said simply, This is a record of a call to Claremont Regional Medical Center placed 14 months ago from the defendant's cell phone number inquiring about the plaintiff's long-term prognosis without the plaintiff's knowledge or consent. This constitutes a violation of HIPAA's patient authorization requirements, and we will be filing a separate complaint with the Office for Civil Rights. Ryan's attorney asked to take a recess. During the recess, I sat in the hallway with Sandra. My parents had been brought in by this point, told only that there was documentation they needed to be aware of. Gerald sat very still. Diane kept touching her necklace. When Sandra briefly summarized what the documentation showed, the medical call, the post-incident communications, the civil complaint, my mother said, "But Ryan wouldn't," and then stopped. Gerald's did not say anything. He looked at his hands. When we returned to the table, Ryan's attorney indicated that his client would like to speak directly to me. Ryan looked across the table. His composure had changed texture. It was still present, but it was thinner now, like paint over something that had shifted. He said, "I never wanted any of this to hurt you, Claire. I want you to know that." I looked at him. I thought about Nora in her rainbow socks asking if she had done something wrong. I thought about the barn floor and the smell of white roses. I said nothing. That silence was enough. The settlement was reached 6 weeks later. Ryan's liability insurer covered the agreed amount of $210,000, which accounted for medical damages, documented pain and impact, and the costs associated with the HIPAA investigation. The Office for Civil Rights issued a formal finding against Ryan for the unauthorized inquiry. His employer, a company with a compliance department, received a notification of the finding as a matter of public record. Ryan was placed on administrative leave pending internal review. He resigned 11 days later.
By February, Ryan had lost his position at the logistics company. The $210,000 settlement had been paid in full. The HIPAA violation remained on the federal record. Melissa, I was told by Patrice, who heard it from someone else, had moved back to her parents' home in Columbus for what was described as a separation. I did not seek that information. I did not need it. My parents called me once in January, together on speakerphone. Diane cried. Gerald said he was sorry in the clipped way he had always apologized for things, efficiently, briefly, as though allocating too much time to it would cost him something irreplaceable. I told them I loved them. I told them I needed distance. I told them that I hoped, in time, something different was possible. Then I focused on what was in front of me. I used part of the settlement to move Nora and me to a different apartment, on the ground floor of a building near a good school and a park with accessible paths. It had large windows. In the mornings, the light came in at an angle that made the kitchen look like something from a photograph. I hired 2 part-time contractors for my design practice. I took on 3 new clients in the first quarter of the new year. I was working from the kitchen table by 8:30 most mornings, coffee in a blue ceramic mug Daniel had given me for my birthday the year before the accident. One morning in March, Nora came into the kitchen before school and sat across from me and ate her cereal in the comfortable silence we had always been good at. And then she looked up and said, "Mom, I like our apartment." "Me too," I said. "It smells nice in the morning," she said. It did, like coffee and the wood of the floors and something faintly like the soap from her bath the night before. I thought about that barn, the white roses, the floor rising up, how a person can cause real harm with the confidence of someone who expects no consequence, how that confidence rests entirely on the silence of everyone they have ever harmed. Ryan sent me an email in April. It was long. It used the word sorry 11 times. It asked if we could speak. I read it once, thoroughly, and then I moved it to a folder I labeled Received, and I did not reply. Not because I wanted to punish him, because I had nothing left to say. What I know now that I did not know fully before is this: loyalty and self-destruction are not the same thing. I had spent years treating them as though they were, as though absorbing harm quietly was a form of love, as though keeping someone else's image intact was worth the cost of my own. It is not. It never was. There is a kind of peace that does not come from winning. It comes from stopping. From the moment you decide that no relationship, no matter how long or how close, is worth the ongoing sacrifice of your own reality. I sat in my kitchen in March with my coffee, and the light was coming through the window at that angle, and Nora was putting on her shoes by the door, and I thought, this is the life I protected by finally stopping the tolerance. This is what it was for. So, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have done what I did and taken the quiet, calculated step that cost you the family you had always wanted, but kept the self you had almost lost? Or would you have stayed silent one more time, told yourself it was easier, and handed the next version of yourself the same weight to carry? I genuinely want to know.